There is a moment in Star Wars, Revenge of the Sith, where the screen splits into 4 simultaneous images. 4 Jedi, 4 locations, 4 different ends. Aayla Secura stands in a sun-drenched jungle when the blasters come. Plo Koon pilots his fighter over Ki-Adi-Mundi when the explosion takes him out of the sky. Ki-Adi-Mundi turns to face his clones with the calm expression of a man who does not yet understand what is happening. Stass Allie rides a speeder bike through the golden landscape of Saleucami, and then she does not. George Lucas filmed those deaths in sequence, cutting between them in a rhythm that feels almost ceremonial. Not dramatic, not shocking, inevitable, like a door closing. The score does not swell. The music that plays over the images is quiet, almost liturgical. The galaxy is ending, and the film refuses to let you look away. It refuses to let it be fast. In the years since Revenge of the Sith came out, in May of 2005, Star Wars has done something unexpected. It has gone back into that moment, that single night when the Republic died and the Jedi died with it, and found, among the wreckage, the ones who did not die, the ones who ran, the ones who hid, the ones who changed their names and buried their lightsabers and tried to become someone else, the ones who were saved by a friend's last warning, the ones who survived because they were somewhere the Empire forgot to look, the ones who survived because Palpatine decided they might be more useful alive than dead. There are roughly 30 named survivors in the current Star Wars canon that we can talk about with confidence. Each of them carries the night of Order 66 differently. Some of them never speak of it. Some of them cannot stop thinking about it. Some of them were transformed into the very weapons the Empire uses to hunt others like them. And some of them, a very small number, managed to hold on to something that looks, if you squint at it in the right light, like hope. This video is about all of them. Welcome to TwinSuns. Get comfortable. Dim the light if you have not already. Let the pillow do its job. This one is long, and it is quiet, and it goes deep, and there is absolutely no rush. If you drift off before we reach the end, that is fine. The story will still be here in the morning, exactly where you left it. If you want to stay awake, the whole galaxy is here waiting for you too. Either way, you are somewhere safe. Nothing is asked of you tonight except to listen, and even that is optional. The number that matters, the one you keep coming back to, is 10,000. That is roughly how many Jedi were part of the Order at the start of the Clone Wars, a peacekeeping organization that had maintained galactic order for 1,000 generations, an institution so old and so deeply woven into the shape of the Republic that most people could not imagine the galaxy without it. 10,000 members, fewer than 100 survived. That is not a military defeat, that is an extinction event. To understand how it happened so completely and so quickly, you have to understand what Order 66 actually was. Not the dramatic version, not the version with the haunting music and the sweeping cinematics, the mechanical version, the engineering version, the version that tells you how a man could press a button on Coruscant and have 10,000 people killed simultaneously across an entire galaxy. During the Clone Wars, every single clone trooper in the Grand Army of the Republic had a behavioral modification chip implanted in their brain during the embryonic stage of their development on Kamino. The Republic called them inhibitor chips. Their official purpose, the purpose on the documentation that Jedi Masters signed off on without fully understanding, was behavioral control, preventing aggression, maintaining discipline in soldiers grown in artificial facilities and trained for nothing but war from the moment of their creation. That was the cover story. The chips had a second function that no Jedi knew about and no clone commander was told. On command, on a specific pre-programmed command, those chips would activate and override every piece of a clone's conscious will, override their loyalty, override their relationships, override everything they had built over years of fighting alongside their Jedi generals. The chips would replace it all with a single, absolute imperative: kill the Jedi. Execute Order 66. The original commission for the clone army came from Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas, who had authorized it in secret because he foresaw a coming war. Sifo-Dyas died before his vision was completed. The Sith found his commission. They finished it their way. The inhibitor chips became part of that finished product, and the Sith spent about 15 years quietly waiting for the moment they had planned all along. There is a clone named Tup who nearly undid all of it. In Clone Wars Season 6, the Lost Missions arc, which arrived in March of 2014, Tup's chip malfunctioned during a battle on Ringo Vinda. His chip activated prematurely, and he killed Jedi General Tiplar in the middle of combat without warning or cause. The incident was too visible to ignore, and it triggered an investigation. That investigation eventually reached Advanced Recon Commando Trooper Fives, who was given Tup's body to examine and discovered the chip. Discovered what it was. Discovered what it was designed to do. Fives did everything a person could do with this information. He removed his own chip. He sought out Jedi help. He tried to reach Chancellor Palpatine directly. And Palpatine, who is, of course, Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who designed the whole system, drugged Fives, framed him as a madman and an assassin, and sent him fleeing for his life through Coruscant. Commander Fox shot Fives before he could reach safety. Fives died in Rex's arms. His last words told Rex to find the truth, to find what he had found. He was shot down hours before he could expose the single greatest conspiracy in the history of the galaxy. The tragedy of Fives is that he came so close. And the detail that matters for everything that follows is that Rex heard him. Rex remembered. When Order 66 came, Rex had just enough doubt, just enough of the warning still echoing in the back of his mind, to do something that no other clone in the galaxy managed to do. But that comes later. First, the Order itself. It arrived at the Battle of Utapau. It arrived at the moon above Mandalore. It arrived on Kashyyyk, and Mon Cala, and Felucia, and Megiddo, and Cato Neimoidia, and in the corridors of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, and on 100 other battlefields across a galaxy that had been at war for 3 years. The command was transmitted by Supreme Chancellor Palpatine in the year 19 before the Battle of Yavin, a date that the Star Wars galaxy marks the way our calendar might mark the fall of Rome or the signing of a death warrant. An ending dressed up as a beginning. On Coruscant, Anakin Skywalker, recently renamed Darth Vader, led the elite 501st Legion into the Jedi Temple. Operation Nightfall. They killed everyone they found. Masters, Knights, Padawans. In one of the most quietly devastating sequences of any Star Wars film, a group of younglings huddles together in the council chamber and asks Anakin if he knows what to do. He ignites his lightsaber. The shot cuts away. The film will not show you what happens next. It does not need to. You already know. The 501st killed almost everyone they could find in the temple that night. Almost. Not quite. What follows is the story of the ones who were not there. The ones who ran fast enough. The ones who had the right friends in the right places. The ones who slipped through the cracks of the most comprehensive murder operation in galactic history. Every one of them carries that night somewhere inside them. Every one of them has a different answer to the question the night asked. What do you do when the world you were trained to protect decides to end you? Let us begin with the two who were most prepared to answer it. Yoda was on Kashyyyk when it happened. He was commanding clone forces alongside the Wookiees, a battle that had drawn him to the outer edges of the Republic's reach, far from Coruscant, far from the center of political power. Kashyyyk mattered strategically, but the more important truth is that Yoda was there, standing on a platform above the trees with Commander Gree and a clone officer at his sides, when Order 66 arrived. What happened next is one of the most precise demonstrations of what it means to be deeply attuned to the Force. Yoda did not see the order transmitted. He did not intercept the signal. He felt it. In the moment before the two clones raised their weapons and moved to fire, Yoda sensed the change in them, not through their body language, not through any observable warning, but through whatever it is the Force grants to someone who has spent 900 years learning to listen to it. He felt a disturbance. He reacted before the guns came up. One sweeping ignition of his lightsaber, both clones dead before they finished drawing. The smallest Jedi Master in the Order, and probably the deadliest in a corridor that small. There is a version of Yoda that lives in the corners of the movies as a whimsical little puppet, and then there is this one, and you should never forget that they are the same person. Then he ran. There is something important in that word. Ran. Yoda did not stay to fight. He did not attempt to hold the position or rally surviving forces or reach the other Jedi across the galaxy. He ran. He called to Chewbacca and Tarful and the Wookiees, who had been fighting alongside him and who had no inhibitor chips and whose loyalty was their own, got him off Kashyyyk. He met Bail Organa aboard the Sundered Heart. He met Obi-Wan Kenobi. Together, they returned to Coruscant, And Yoda did something there that would matter more than anything else he could have done with those hours. He and Obi-Wan recalibrated the emergency signal at the Jedi Temple. The Empire was broadcasting a false signal on the temple's frequency, calling surviving Jedi home to what would have been a trap. Yoda changed it. He turned it into a warning, a broadcast telling any surviving Jedi to scatter, to run, to not come to Coruscant. He could not save the ones who were already dead. He could save some of the ones who were still running. Then came the Senate chamber. Yoda fought Darth Sidious in the center of the Republic Senate, a duel that takes place in one of the most architecturally symbolic locations in the saga. The Senate chamber where the Republic had governed for 1,000 years. The place where Palpatine had just given his speech about the Galactic Empire to thunderous applause. They threw Senate pods at each other. They pushed each other through the air. And then Yoda fell. Not defeated, not killed. Forced, in that specific place, at that specific moment, to acknowledge that Sidious was stronger. He retreated. He let himself be pulled into a service tube and survived the fall. He was retrieved and taken away. That retreat cost Yoda something. Not his life, his certainty. For 9 centuries, Yoda had been the anchor of the Jedi Order, the Master's master, the one everyone looked to for answers. And in the Senate chamber, he had found a fight he could not win. He had failed to stop the architect of the entire catastrophe. He had to live with that. He went to Dagobah, a swamp planet in the Outer Rim, a planet strong in the dark side of the Force, which paradoxically made it excellent at hiding the presence of a Force sensitive from anyone searching for one. The darkness masked the light. He lived there alone, in a small clay dwelling, for the better part of the next 2 decades and more. But he was not entirely alone. On Dagobah, Yoda began to hear the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon had died at the Battle of Naboo decades earlier, but he had been researching the path to something no Jedi had ever fully achieved, the preservation of consciousness after death through the Force. He had not mastered it. He could not manifest a body. What he could do was appear as twinkling points of light, small motes of energy drifting at the edge of Yoda's perception, and speak. That detail comes directly from Clone Wars Season 6, the Voices arc, and it is specific enough to matter. Qui-Gon Jinn spent whatever time he had after death teaching Yoda the first steps towards something the Order had never seen before. The path to becoming a Force ghost, to preserving identity and consciousness after physical death, was information that would eventually be passed to Obi-Wan, and through Obi-Wan to the generation of Jedi that followed. The exile on Dagobah lasted until the rebellion found its footing, until a boy named Luke Skywalker arrived, guided there by the voice of Obi-Wan. Yoda trained Luke, with considerable reluctance, because he felt Luke was too old, too raw, too entangled with Vader. But he trained him, and then he died, peacefully, in his own hut, at the age of 900, becoming one with the Force, in the way he had spent decades preparing for. That is not failure. That is a 900-year life, ending on its own terms, passing something forward. Sit with that for a moment against the backdrop of everyone else in this story, because most of them do not get to end that way. Yoda is, in a sense, the counterweight the whole Order 66 mythology hangs from. Every other survivor is measured, quietly, against the possibility that if you outlive the storm long enough and pass what you carry to the next person, then something continues. Yoda did that. He is the proof, sitting in a swamp, that the extinction was not quite total. The story of Obi-Wan Kenobi on the day Order 66 arrived is, in some ways, the story of a man who survived by accident. Yoda survived because his attunement to the Force gave him a split-second warning. Obi-Wan survived because his clone commander shot him into water from a great height and assumed he was dead. Obi-Wan was on Utapau. He had just killed General Grievous, the cyborg supreme commander of the Separatist droid army, in a brutal, close-quarters fight inside a sinkhole city. Grievous was dead. The battle was won. Obi-Wan was riding his Varactyl, Boga, down the side of the sinkhole when Commander Cody received the order. Cody was not a villain. This is something the story asks you to hold. Cody was someone Obi-Wan trusted completely, someone they had fought alongside for years, someone Obi-Wan had passed his lightsaber to minutes earlier and taken back with a grin. The inhibitor chip did not give Cody a choice. When the order came, Commander Cody turned an artillery cannon on his own general and fired. The blast hit the cliff face, Boga screamed. Obi-Wan went over the edge and into the water far below. Cody sent scouts to search. They found Boga's body. They did not find Obi-Wan. They reported him dead, because the alternative, that a Jedi Master had survived a cliff fall into an alien sea, seemed too unlikely to verify further. Cody moved on. The Empire moved on. Obi-Wan lay on the bottom of a Utapan sinkhole pool and breathed. He recovered. He found General Grievous's personal starfighter still parked in the hangar, because nobody had thought to secure it after the battle. He took it and got off Utapau. He made his way to the Sundered Heart, to Bail Organa, to Yoda. They went to the temple. They saw what had been done to it. Obi-Wan watched a recording of Anakin Skywalker killing Jedi younglings in the council chamber, and the expression on his face in that scene is one of the great acting moments of the prequel trilogy. Then he went to Mustafar. The conversation he had with Anakin there, before the duel, is essentially a man trying to find any version of his former student that can still be reached. He does not find one. The duel ends with Anakin burning on the banks of a lava river, and Obi-Wan standing above him unable to deliver the killing blow. Not because he lacks the ability, but because he still cannot fully accept what has happened. He takes Anakin's lightsaber. He leaves. He goes to Tatooine, where Padme Amidala has just died delivering twins, and he carries one of those twins, Luke, to Owen and Beru Lars on a moisture farm in the desert. Then he watches. For nearly a decade, he watches. He lives in a cave in the Junlin wastes, close enough to see the Lars homestead from a ridge, far enough not to be noticed. He does not teach Luke. He does not make contact. He waits. He meditates. He tries, in fits and starts, to reach the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn the way Yoda had, and he becomes, slowly, an old man in the desert who used to be something extraordinary. The Exile breaks 9 years after Revenge of the Sith, in the Obi-Wan Kenobi miniseries that premiered on Disney Plus on May 27, 2022. The series runs 6 episodes, and what it shows, beyond the plot mechanics of Leia's kidnapping and the rescue and the confrontation with Vader, is a man in the grip of something that looks, from the outside, like depression. Obi-Wan in those early episodes barely functions. He is going through motions. He has not ignited a lightsaber in nearly a decade. He has let himself become small, because smallness keeps you alive and visibility gets you killed, and he has come to believe that the most important thing he can do is survive long enough to protect Luke. The show forces him out of that stasis. He goes to help Leia. He gets drawn into the wider galaxy. He comes face to face with Vader again for the first time since Mustafar, and the scene where Vader drags him through fire and holds him above the flames is harrowing specifically because it shows what Obi-Wan has become. Slower, more afraid, less certain. He is not the master duelist of Revenge of the Sith. He is someone who has spent almost 10 years trying very hard not to be a Jedi. The arc of the show is his recovery. By the finale, he fights Vader again, this time on more equal terms. The exchange they have, Obi-Wan telling Vader that Anakin Skywalker is dead, that only Vader remains, is one of the most quietly devastating conversations in the franchise, because Obi-Wan believes it, and then he walks away, gets back on his ship, and goes back to the desert. He dies 11 years later, in A New Hope. He sees Luke. He watches Han Solo. He steps in front of Vader's lightsaber, closes his eyes, and vanishes. The gap between the frightened, hollowed-out man in the early episodes of the Kenobi show and the serene figure who chooses his own moment to become a Force ghost is the whole arc. It is the story of someone who survived Order 66 by pure chance, spent a decade rebuilding himself in the silence of the desert, and found a way, eventually, to go back to being exactly who he was always supposed to be. It is, if you are honest about it, the most patient survival story in the whole saga. Now we get to the most complicated survival story of Order 66, the one that requires the most care to explain, because the truth of it has several layers, and the first layer is technically a technicality. Ahsoka Tano was not a Jedi when Order 66 happened. She had left the Order more than a year earlier, in the final arc of Clone Wars Season 5, the arc where she was falsely accused of bombing the Jedi Temple and conspiring with Sith. The Council suspended her and turned her over to a military tribunal to be executed. The charges were eventually proven false. The Council offered her reinstatement and even told her that the trial had been, in effect, her greater test. Ahsoka walked away. She handed back her lightsabers, and she walked out of the temple, and she did not come back. So technically, legally, by the Order's own records, she was not a Jedi on the night of Order 66. The Empire did not care about the technicality. She was Force-sensitive. She had been trained. She was a threat. And the clones who received Order 66 aboard the ship above Mandalore did not check her membership status before they began to hunt her. Ahsoka was on that ship because she had led the siege of Mandalore, a campaign to capture Maul, who had taken control of the planet's criminal underground. The campaign had succeeded. She had Maul in custody. She was working alongside Clone Captain Rex and a full complement of clone troopers when the Order came. The Siege of Mandalore arc spans the last 4 episodes of Clone Wars Season 7. Old Friends Not Forgotten, The Phantom Apprentice, Shattered, and Victory and Death, and the season premiered on Disney Plus on February 21st, 2020. Here is what happened when Order 66 arrived. Rex had been there when Fives died. He carried that memory, and when the Order came, there was something, some fragment of the man Rex actually was, fighting against the override in his chip that let him get one sentence out to Ahsoka. He told her to find Fives. Then the chip took him completely. Ahsoka did not know what that meant, but she remembered it. She ran. What followed in those final 2 episodes is some of the most beautifully made animation in the history of Star Wars. Ahsoka and Rex against a ship full of clone troopers, clones who had been her friends, her comrades, people she had fought beside. She released Maul as a distraction. She captured Rex, physically restrained him, and then, while her own ship descended into chaos and the clones hunted her through its corridors, she found a way to get Rex's inhibitor chip surgically removed with the help of a medical droid. She talked her way through the procedure with Rex pinned to a table and clones cutting through the door above her. When the chip came out, Rex was himself again, disoriented, horrified by what he had almost done, but himself. The two of them fought back to back through the rest of the ship and eventually escaped as the cruiser crashed. They laid out their helmets on the wreckage to suggest they had died in the crash. They faked their deaths and disappeared. That scene, the one where Rex wakes up and looks at Ahsoka and the full weight of what he almost did settles on him, is one of the great understated moments of the entire franchise. He does not have a speech. He does not explain himself. He looks at her and he already understands everything, and the show holds on that for exactly as long as it needs to. I will admit, quietly, that this is the moment in Clone Wars I think about most often. Ahsoka spent the period after Order 66 doing something that is covered in the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston, a canon novel published in 2016 and set roughly a year after the end of the Clone Wars. She was hiding on the agricultural moon of Rada, trying to live an ordinary life under the name Ashla. The moon was eventually occupied by the Empire, and the situation escalated until the 6th brother, an Inquisitor named Bill Valen, arrived to hunt the Force-sensitive presence on the planet. Ahsoka had no lightsabers. She had abandoned them when she faked her death, so she killed the 6th brother without them. She used the Force to detonate his own dual-bladed spinning lightsaber from within, pulling the kyber crystals out of the weapon's housing while it was still active. The resulting explosion killed him, and then she stood there holding 2 kyber crystals that had been bled red by the Sith process. The dark side had been forced into them, turning them red the way all Inquisitor crystals were turned red, and she did something that no canon character had been shown doing before. She purified them. She sat with those crystals and poured something into them. Call it the Force. Call it her specific relationship to the light side that exists outside the formal Jedi Order. Call it whatever you need to call it. The red bled out of them. They turned white. Not blue, not green, white. A color that does not belong to any Jedi tradition or Sith tradition. A color that belongs entirely to Ahsoka Tano. Her white-bladed lightsabers, which she carries in every subsequent appearance, are a constant visual declaration. I am not Jedi. I am not Sith. I am something that survived both. Sit with what that actually means for a character who had everything taken from her, then had the galaxy's most systematic murder operation aimed at her, and still found a way to carve out a space that was authentically her own. After Rada, she became Fulcrum, an intelligence contact for the early rebellion, feeding information to scattered resistance cells. She worked in the shadows for years before making contact with the Rebel crew that would become the stars of Star Wars Rebels. She appeared in the Rebels Season 1 finale, and the reveal of her identity, after a season of the audience knowing her only by her codename, is one of those moments that Rebels fans still point to as evidence that the show was something special. Her role in Rebels across all 4 seasons is substantial. She became a mentor figure, an intelligence source, and eventually a combatant again. Season 2 ended with her apparent death at the Sith Temple on Malachor, fighting Vader in a duel that confirmed the show knew exactly what it was doing, but she was pulled back through the world between worlds in Season 4 by Ezra Bridger, who reached across time and space to pull her away from that blade. She emerged onto a desert world and walked away, and was not seen again until the final moments of the Rebels finale. The Ahsoka series on Disney+, which premiered on August 22, 2023, picks her story up 9 years after the Battle of Yavin, more than 20 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. She is searching for Grand Admiral Thrawn and Ezra Bridger, both of whom were lost when Ezra called a pod of Purrgil to carry Thrawn's fleet into hyperspace at the end of Rebels. The show is dense. It requires prior knowledge. It ends with Ahsoka and her companion Sabine Wren stranded in a distant galaxy while Thrawn returns to ours. The most important thing about Ahsoka's full arc, across every piece of media she appears in, is the thing she refused to become. She refused to be the Jedi who could not imagine an identity outside the Order. She refused to be the survivor who let the trauma calcify into hatred. She refused to become an Inquisitor, refused to become a ghost, refused to become a symbol. She stayed a person. That is harder than it sounds, when you are the last remnant of something the entire galaxy tried to erase. Caleb Dume was 14 years old when his world ended. He was on the planet Kaller, fighting alongside his master Depa Billaba and a unit of clone troopers that included the experimental soldiers known as Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch. The battle had been going well, the clones were effective, the separatist forces were falling back. And then the Order came. The Bad Batch are genetically modified clones, soldiers with enhanced mutations that gave them unusual abilities. Hunter had heightened senses. Wrecker had superhuman strength. Tech had accelerated mental processing. Crosshair had a sniper's precision. The mutations that made them exceptional soldiers also, as it turned out, affected how their inhibitor chips expressed themselves. Most of them experienced Order 66 as noise, as a compulsion that they could hear but could not quite feel the full force of. Their chips were present. They were just less precisely tuned. Crosshair was different. He was the least genetically enhanced of the group, closest to a standard clone, and his chip worked. Depa Billaba understood what was happening in the first seconds. She was a senior Jedi Master. She had been a member of the Council. She had fought through the Clone Wars and survived things that should have killed her. When the clones turned, she turned with them. She planted herself between the guns and Caleb, and she ordered him to run. Not fight, not help her, run. He ran. He got to the edge of a cliff, and Hunter was there, the Bad Batch's leader, whose chip was firing but whose free will was still present enough to hesitate. Hunter looked at this 14-year-old boy and let him go. In the same moment, Crosshair raised his sniper rifle and fired. The shot missed. It may have been luck. It may have been that Crosshair's aim, precise as it was, could not entirely override whatever was still human in him when the target was a child. The Bad Batch Season 1, which premiered on Disney Plus on May 4th, 2021, depicts this scene in its opening episode, and it lands quietly, without melodrama. A boy runs into the trees, his master's lightsabers cut off. Caleb Dume ran until he could not run anymore, and then he kept running. The Kanan, the Last Padawan comic series, published by Marvel beginning in 2015, covers what happened in the months and years after. He found a smuggler named Janus Casimir, who had no patience for idealism and a great deal of practical knowledge about staying alive in a galaxy run by an authoritarian empire. Casimir taught him to steal, taught him to blend in, taught him that the lightsaber in his pocket was a death sentence if anyone saw it, taught him, essentially, that being a Jedi was a luxury the galaxy could no longer afford. Caleb buried the Jedi. He became Kanan Jarrus, a name with no history, no council record, no Jedi archive entry. A man who could operate a freighter. A man who could do a job without asking too many questions. A man who had made peace with the idea that the galaxy had moved on and left no room for what he had been trained to be. He was not at peace. He had just learned to perform it convincingly. Star Wars Rebels, which premiered in October of 2014 and ran for 4 seasons across 75 total episodes, found Kanan as a member of a small, ragtag rebel cell operating out of a modified freighter called the Ghost. He flew with Hera Syndulla, a Twi'lek pilot who had been building the cell for years. He kept his lightsaber locked away. He did not talk about his past. He was, by every external measure, a man who had successfully left the Jedi behind. Then he met Ezra Bridger on the planet Lothal, and everything he had built to keep himself safe started to come apart. Ezra was 14, Force-sensitive, alone, the exact age Caleb had been when Depa Billaba told him to run. And Kanan did something that made no tactical sense and cost him every layer of protective anonymity he had carefully constructed. He took Ezra on as his Padawan. He started teaching him. He started being a Jedi again, in a galaxy where that was still a death sentence. The show tracks his transformation across all 4 seasons. He is not a perfect teacher. He is too closed off, too shaped by his own incomplete training, too afraid of what his presence might mean for the people around him. He makes mistakes that a more fully trained Jedi would not make. But he is present. He shows up. He tries. And in a moment that the show treats with genuine weight, the spirits of the Jedi Temple guards formally recognize him as a Jedi Knight during a vision in the Lothal Temple, a ceremony without precedent, performed by the ancient protectors of the Order's sacred places, for a man who finished training himself while hiding from an empire. Maul blinded him in Season 3. He fought with a blindfold after that, using the Force to see, adapting to the loss in a way that the show presents not as tragedy, but as transformation. The Force could give him more than his eyes ever had. He died in Season 4, in the episode titled Jedi Knight. A fuel pod was exploding on a landing platform. Hera, Ezra, and Sabine were there. They could not get clear in time. Kanan used the Force to hold the explosion back, physically containing it, pushing against forces that should have been impossible to restrain, long enough to look at Hera one last time and push them all to safety aboard the Ghost. Then the fire took him. His blindfold burned away in that moment. His eyes cleared. He saw, really saw, for the first time in years, just before the end. There is a version of Kanan Jarrus' story that is purely tragic. A boy who lost his master, who lost his training, who lost his identity, who built a new life from nothing, and then burned it all down for the people he loved. That reading is not wrong, but the show is careful to show you something else inside it. That the burning was not waste, that the life he built was real, that the people he saved were saved, that the Padawan he trained went on. Ezra Bridger is alive because Kanan Jarrus did not stay Caleb Dume forever. That is not a small thing. Now consider the smallest Jedi to survive Order 66. Grogu, known to the galaxy at large as Baby Yoda, known in the canon only as Grogu, was a Jedi youngling living and training in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant when Vader and the 501st arrived on the night of Order 66. He was 50 years old, which sounds strange until you understand that his species ages so slowly that at 50, he was still developmentally equivalent to a toddler. He had the Force sensitivity that his species was known for. He had the round eyes and the large ears and the impossibly small hands. He was, objectively, helpless. He was not, as it turned out, alone. The story of how Grogu escaped the Jedi Temple was a mystery for the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. The show introduced him in 2019, had Din Djarin, the Mandalorian bounty hunter, find him on a remote desert planet, and gave him a complete present-tense arc while leaving his past a deliberate blank. Where had he come from? How had a creature born in the heart of the Jedi Order survived the night the Order was destroyed? The show did not answer for years. It let the audience wonder. The answer came in The Mandalorian Season 3, in an episode that aired in early 2023. It came through a flashback, and the answer was a Jedi Master named Kelleran Beck. BUQ was running through the temple corridors with Grogu in his arms when we first see him, already moving, already fighting. Clones behind him and the sounds of battle everywhere. He is exceptional. His lightsaber work is precise and economical, the kind of technique that belongs to someone who has been training for decades without a single wasted movement. His nickname, the Sabered Hand, was not honorary. He cut through clone troopers in the temple hallways, protecting a toddler-aged alien with the same absolute commitment that Depa Billaba showed on Kaller. He got to a landing platform. He got to a ship. He got out of Coruscant. Naboo royal guards helped him escape, a detail that connects, obliquely and intriguingly, to whatever relationship Beck had with the household network that had once served Padme Amidala. The actor playing Kelleran Beck was Ahmed Best. This matters. Ahmed Best voiced Jar Jar Binks in the prequel trilogy, and the character's reception was one of the most painful stories in Star Wars history. The backlash against Jar Jar Binks in 1999 was not just critical, it was personal, sustained, and vicious. Best has spoken in interviews about the years of mental health struggles that followed, about reaching dark places because the thing he gave his creative energy to had become a cultural punchline. He kept working. He stayed in Star Wars-adjacent spaces, hosting the children's game show Star Wars Jedi Temple Challenge, the show where the character Kelleran Beck was first created, designed as a Jedi host for a series of games about Jedi trials. And then Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau cast him in The Mandalorian to play Kelleran Beck in live action. The Jedi who saved the most beloved character in modern Star Wars. The Jedi who ran through the flames to protect a child. The character who exists in the show to be the specific person who made Grogu's survival possible. The audience's response to that reveal was immediate and unanimous. Ahmed Best, in the role that began as a children's game show host, had become the man who saved Baby Yoda. Fans and crew members called it a rehabilitation. He called it healing. Watch the scene and try to separate those two things. I do not think it can be done, and I do not think it is supposed to be. That is a very rare thing, honestly. Star Wars is a big enough machine that it rarely gets to apologize to any single person inside it. When it does, when it turns around and hands someone the exact opposite of what it took from them, that is not a coincidence, and it is not marketing. It is a kind of quiet grace. Not many franchises this size ever bother. Grogu's story between his rescue by Beck and his discovery by Din Djarin in The Mandalorian Season 1 remains largely unaddressed in canon. That gap, decades wide, is an unanswered question the show has not yet chosen to fill in. What is confirmed is that he survived, that he kept his Force sensitivity, that when Din Djarin found him on the planet Arvala 7, he was 50 years old and still learning, still forming his first real attachment to anyone since the temple burned. The story of that attachment is, in many ways, the emotional spine of the Mandalorian. A Mandalorian who keeps his face hidden and a Force-sensitive who cannot yet speak, forming the most powerful bond in either of their lives. The way Grogu survived Order 66, a Jedi Master running through a burning building with him in his arms, is the template for everything that follows. Cal Kestis was aboard the Republic Star Destroyer Albedo Brave when Order 66 was transmitted. He was a Jedi Padawan, a teenager, training under Jedi Master Jaro Tapal, a Lasat, tall and broad, and physically formidable in the way that some Jedi were. The kind of master whose presence filled a room. The 13th Battalion under Tapal's command turned on their Jedi at the same moment everyone else in the galaxy turned. Cal watched his master get shot, repeatedly, shielding Cal with his own body. Tapal did not immediately die. He fought on, bleeding, pushing Cal through the Star Destroyer's corridors toward an escape pod. He gave Cal everything he had left. His final instruction, his last teaching, was not a piece of philosophical wisdom or a meditation on the Force. He told Cal to hold the line, to trust the Force, to wait for a signal from surviving Jedi before doing anything that would reveal himself. He told Cal to run. Then he died. This is the same instruction Depa Billaba gave Caleb Dume. Run, survive. These Jedi Masters, facing the same impossible situation in different corners of the galaxy, made the same calculation. The mission is the student. Their deaths were not failures. They were choices. Cal survived and made it to the planet Bracca, a junkyard world where decommissioned Republic ships were salvaged. He hid in plain sight, working as a scrapper, a laborer who dismantled the same Star Destroyers he had once served on. He suppressed his Force abilities completely, following T'Pol's last instruction to the letter. Do not stand out, do not be found. He did this for 5 years. He was found anyway. A friend named Prof had an accident on the job, falling from a great height, and Cal caught him with the Force before he could think about what that meant. The reflexive act of saving someone he cared about blew his cover. An Inquisitor named the Second Sister arrived within what seemed like days. Jedi, Fallen Order, the Respawn Entertainment action-adventure game, developed with Lucasfilm and released on November the 15th, 2019, is set 14 years before the Battle of Yavin, 5 years after Order 66. Cal's story in the game covers his journey from exposed fugitive to someone actively trying to build something. He teams up with Cere Junda, a Jedi who survived the Purge and subsequently spent years wrestling with her own guilt. A former Jedi pilot named Grease Dritus. A droid named BD-1, who carries within his memory banks a complete record of everything Jedi Master Eno Cordova knew about the locations of Force-sensitive children across the galaxy. The game takes Cal to Bogano, Zepho, Kashyyyk, Dathomir, and eventually Ilum, the sacred Jedi world where kyber crystals grow and lightsabers are built. Each world carries weight. Each world has something the Empire has already reached, already corrupted, already turned into something ugly. Cal is not just trying to find a holocron, he is trying to find proof that the Jedi Order can have a future. He finds the holocron, and then he destroys it. This is the moment in Fallen Order that defines Cal Kestis as a character. He has the holocron, a complete database of Force-sensitive children across the galaxy. Every name, every world. It was what the whole game was building toward. And when he holds it and considers what using it actually means, finding those children, bringing them together, training them, making them visible to the Empire that is actively hunting Force users, he understands that a list of children in the hands of anyone is also a list of children for the Empire to find. He destroys the data. Let me be plain about it. Cal Kestis did the entire game for nothing. He did it for the right thing, which turned out to be nothing. That decision, to sacrifice the answer rather than risk it becoming the problem, is the single most quietly mature choice anyone in this story makes. Most heroic quest stories end with the object of the quest being used, being deployed, being turned into a moment of triumph. This one ends with a young man looking at the thing he was told to bring home and deciding, quietly, that bringing it home is the same as pointing the enemy at every child on that list. He chose the ambiguous ending over the satisfying one. There is a whole grown-up ethic tucked inside that choice. Jedi, Survivor, released on April the 28th, 2023, picks up 5 years later, 9 years before the Battle of Yavin. Cal is on Coruscant doing covert operations for what will become the Rebel Alliance, and he is looking for something. Not a holocron this time, a place, a hidden world called Tanalorr, a refuge, somewhere the Empire cannot reach, where the surviving remnants of the Jedi and their allies could actually be safe. The game takes him deeper into the High Republic era's history, into the legacy of an ancient Jedi Order before the Clone Wars, and into a confrontation with an antagonist who predates everything Cal has ever known. The end of Survivor does not give Cal a clean resolution. It gives him a path. That has always been the point of Cal Kestis. Not that he finds the answer, but that he keeps looking for it, when every reasonable assessment of the situation says there is no answer to find. Cere Junda's story runs alongside Cal's, but has a different texture. She was with a group of younglings, children she was trying to protect in the immediate chaos following Order 66, when the Imperials found them. She tried to draw the search away from the children. She was captured. She was tortured. And in the torture, she broke. She told them where her Padawan was. Her Padawan was Trilla Suduri. And what happened to Trilla after that information came out belongs in the next section of this story. What Cere did with her guilt was, for years, nothing. She cut herself off from the Force, sealed it away, not because she could not access it, but because she did not trust herself with it. She had used it her whole life, and the one time it mattered most, she had used the information she had to destroy the person she was most responsible for. Her Force connection was not a comfort, it was evidence. By the time she met Cal, she had spent years building something else, an identity as a fixer, an organizer, someone who helped people survive without necessarily helping them thrive. She joined the Hidden Path, a network of safe houses and volunteers smuggling Force sensitives away from Empire reach. She found Eno Cordova's droid and his holocron and decided there was a use for them. She let herself start hoping again. In Jedi Survivor, she died defending that hope. Protecting the holocron, protecting the people around her. Her death completes the arc. a woman who spent years unable to forgive herself for a single failure, eventually dying in the act of not failing the same way twice. Sit with the shape of that life for a second. The distance between who she was when she first appears in Fallen Order, closed off, guilt-ridden, still barely able to hold a lightsaber without flinching, and who she becomes at the end of Survivor. That is a long road. She walked it fully. There is a specific kind of Survivor story that runs through the Order 66 mythology like a cold current, and it is this. Some of the people who lived through that night did not survive it intact. Some of them were too broken, too young, too alone, too deep in pain. And the Empire, which had designed the entire mechanism of the Purge, was ready for those people, ready to receive them, ready to offer them a place in the structure, a purpose that felt like power, a community that felt like belonging, even if what it actually was a leash. These were the Inquisitors, the hunters who became the hunted who became the hunters again, turned inside out by the very system that had tried to kill them. Reva Savander was a youngling in the Jedi Temple on the night Vader and the 501st arrived. She was a child. She watched children die around her, the only family she had ever had. When Vader's lightsaber came for her, she survived the only way a person can survive a moment like that without a plan. By luck and by instinct. She fell. She was stabbed, perhaps, or she fell between the bodies, or she collapsed in a way that read as dead, and the 501st moved on. She survived by playing dead. She lay there in the dark, surrounded by the bodies of the other younglings, and she decided something. Not consciously, not immediately, not in a single clear moment of resolution, but over whatever time passed, whatever process took place in the hours and days after the massacre. She decided to get close enough to Vader to kill him. She decided that the way to do that was to become exactly what the Empire wanted, an Inquisitor, a hunter of surviving Jedi. She would earn their trust, rise through their ranks, and use the access she gained to avenge the children she had watched die. This is the arc of the third sister in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which premiered on May the 27th, 2022. 6 episodes, set 9 years before the Battle of Yavin, the same year as the show's main plot. Reva's revenge plan has been running for a decade by the time the series begins. She is senior enough in the Inquisitorius to have real authority. She is dangerous enough that even the Grand Inquisitor, her nominal superior, is wary of her. Her gambit is essentially this: find Obi-Wan Kenobi, because Kenobi is Vader's greatest fixation. Because wherever Kenobi appears, Vader will come. Because if she can get Vader alone, in the right circumstances, she can strike. What she does not account for, what the plan could never have accounted for, is what happens when she almost succeeds and then loses. The Grand Inquisitor survives what should have been a fatal wound. Vader survives everything she tries. She stabs Vader through with her Inquisitor blade at the end of Episode 5, and he pulls the blade out of himself and runs her through in return, and she lies bleeding on the ground of the Fortress Inquisitorius with a decade of her life's work failing. She survives. Again. And now she has the information she extracted earlier in the series, the location of the Lars homestead on Tatooine, where she knows Vader's secret son is being raised. She goes there to kill the boy. She stands over a sleeping Luke Skywalker with the Inquisitor lightsaber in her hand, and she cannot do it. She cannot do it because she knows what it looks like when you cut down the children. She watched it happen to her, in that temple, 20 years ago. She cannot be the person who does that. She cannot turn herself into the thing she spent a decade hunting. She drops the lightsaber. Owen Lars beats her unconscious with a farm tool and leaves her in the dirt. Obi-Wan finds her there, tells her that she now has a choice, that the past cannot be undone, but the future is still open, and leaves. She throws her Inquisitor blade away. Reva Savander's arc in Obi-Wan Kenobi is the most emotionally complete story in the series. The show knows it. She is the character the writing is most careful with. Every choice she makes is rooted in a wound that is completely understandable, and the resolution of her story does not redeem her through victory. It redeems her through the decision not to repeat the worst thing that was ever done to her. That is a very different kind of survival than the ones we have discussed so far. Trilla Sudori's story is a tragedy with a single line at its center. She was a Padawan, Sere Junda's Padawan, when Order 66 happened. She survived the initial chaos, hiding with the other younglings Sarah was protecting. She survived until Sarah's information gave her location away. She did not survive what came after. Capture, torture, the kind of extended, systematic breaking that the Empire was good at. She felt betrayed, not by abstract forces, but by the specific person who was supposed to protect her, who had given her away. That betrayal was the crack that the dark side found its way through. She emerged from the Empire's treatment as the second sister, the most persistent antagonist in Jedi Fallen Order. The game does something interesting with the second sister. It does not hide her identity for a dramatic reveal. It tells you early, Sarah knows who she is. Sarah has been living with that knowledge. The tension is not who the second sister is, but whether anything can be done about it. Whether the person inside the Inquisitor armor is still there to be reached. When they finally face each other directly, Sarah apologizes, fully, without qualifications, without excuses, without the self-protecting language of someone who is sorry about outcomes rather than sorry for choices. She apologizes for what she did, and Trilla, hearing it, begins to shift. You can see it. Something inside the second sister that had been locked for years begins to open. Vader kills her before it can open fully. He walks in on the moment and runs her through with his blade without ceremony. Because a former Jedi who is turning back toward the light is more dangerous to the Empire than a Jedi who is actively fighting him. The Inquisitors are tools. Tools that show signs of independent function get discarded. Her last words were, "Avenge us." She said it to Sarah, not to Cal, to Sarah, the person who had wronged her and then tried to make it right. The person she was still, even then, in relationship with. Those two words carry the entire weight of everything the Inquisitorius represents. People who survived something catastrophic, who were offered a terrible choice, who made it, and who still had, underneath everything that had been done to them and everything they had done, something that remembered what it had been before. The tragedy of Trilla, if you sit with it, is not that she fell. It is that the door back to who she was had been standing open the whole time, and no one, not the order that raised her, not the master who owed her an apology, not the empire that recruited her, had figured out how to walk her through it until the exact moment the door was about to close for good. The Grand Inquisitor did not have a Trilla Suduri moment. He did not have a final flash of the person he had been. He chose early and chose completely, and what he became was entirely what he decided to be. He was a Pauan, a species native to the sinkhole world of Utapau, humanoid, with pale gray skin and deeply lined features. His birth name has never been given in canon. Before Order 66, he served as a Jedi Temple Guard, one of the anonymous, masked sentinels who protected the physical spaces of the temple and maintained order within its walls. He was good at his work. He was attuned to the Force. He understood the structure of Jedi institutions in the granular, practical way that someone responsible for their physical security would understand them. He fell to the dark side before Order 66. The exact nature of his fall is not detailed in canon beyond its broad outlines. He was drawn toward beliefs the Jedi Order deemed dangerous, investigated and kept under observation, and ultimately either expelled or chose to leave. The most telling detail, revealed in the Rebels episode Shroud of Darkness, is that he aided Vader during the siege of the Jedi Temple. He was not a victim of Operation Nightfall. He helped make it possible. That detail reframes everything about him. He is not a survivor who broke under pressure. He is a collaborator who made his choice before the pressure arrived. In Star Wars Rebels, which the Grand Inquisitor bookends as the primary antagonist of Season 1, he is precise and cold and genuinely frightening. He knows things about the Jedi that only someone who had trained and served with them would know. He understands their techniques. He knows how they fight. He uses that knowledge against Kanan and Ezra with the confident efficiency of someone whose entire purpose has narrowed to a single function. He is not conflicted. He is not searching for redemption. He is doing exactly what he chose to do. He dies in the Season 1 finale. Faced with defeat at the hands of Kanan Jarrus, he makes the calculation that Vader's punishment for failure is worse than death. He tells them there are some things far more frightening than death, and then he lets himself fall. He appears again, alive, it turns out, because of something that happens in the dark side, in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series in 2022, where he is the Inquisitorius's primary representative. His scenes there are quieter than his rebels' appearances. He is measured, authoritative, accustomed to his position. The show does not try to complicate him further. He knows what he is. That is, honestly, the scariest thing about him. Every other Inquisitor in this story is a wound-wearing armor. The Grand Inquisitor is not a wound. He looked at the two sides and chose. There is no torture to break, no betrayal to grieve, no door to walk back through. That absence, more than any lightsaber trick, is what makes him work as a villain. Now we arrive at a section of this story that many viewers will be less familiar with, because it lives almost entirely in comics and novels rather than film or animation. The Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith comic series, published by Marvel beginning in 2017 and written by Charles Soule, is one of the most detailed explorations of the immediate post-Order 66 period that the Star Wars canon has produced. It covers Vader's first months in his armor, his acquisition of a kyber crystal, his construction of his red lightsaber, his early hunts, and in doing so, it documents the stories of Jedi who survived Order 66 and were then hunted down, one by one, in the days and weeks that followed. The first survivor Vader encounters in that comic is Ki-Adi-Mundi, and his story is one of the more remarkable in the entire mythology. Infilla had survived Order 66 because he was not present for it. Not in the way Obi-Wan or Ahsoka were not present. He had removed himself from the entire Jedi Order, from the war, from all of it, years before the Order was given. He had taken the Barash Vow. The Barash Vow is a piece of Jedi lore created by Charles Soule for this comic, and it is a significant addition to the canon. It was a vow of penance, a formal declaration by a Jedi that they were withdrawing from all Order activities, all galactic involvement, all relationships with other Jedi, for a specified period of time or indefinitely. It was an extreme act of spiritual atonement, used by Jedi who felt they had committed wrongs that required not just correction, but complete withdrawal. The vow meant they were not assigned to any war front. They did not serve in the Clone Wars. They were, effectively, not on any active roster when Order 66 was transmitted. Ki-Adi-Mundi had been meditating in isolation on a river moon called Aldolim. He had not fought in the Clone Wars. He had not been assigned to any clone unit. When the order came, there were no clones near him to execute it. When Vader came to Aldolim to claim the kyber crystal he needed for his saber, still carrying the wound of his transformation, still new in his armor, still finding the limits of what the suit could and could not do, Infilla met him with the full force of everything he had. He was, by several accounts in the comic, a remarkably skilled warrior. He had spent years doing nothing but training and meditating. He had not been worn down by 3 years of grinding wartime command. He was fresh in a way that almost no Jedi fighting Vader at this stage was fresh. He nearly won. He threw Vader off a cliff. Not metaphorically. Vader went over the edge of the river moon, fell, and lay at the bottom broken, armor damaged, the suit that was keeping him alive barely functioning. Infilla had won. He turned his back. This was the mistake. Vader, through sheer will, through the dark side, through whatever it is that makes Darth Vader, repaired himself. He stripped components from Infilla's droid companion. He climbed back up, and he used the Force to kill a city full of people as leverage against Infilla, threatening to let them fall unless Infilla submitted. Infilla refused to submit. Vader let them fall. Then, with nothing between them, Vader reached out with the Force and snapped Ki-Adi-Mundi's neck. The scene is devastating in the comic precisely because of the setup. This was a Jedi who had survived Order 66, specifically because he had removed himself from the war. His penance, his deliberate withdrawal, had accidentally been the thing that kept him alive. And then Vader found him anyway, and took from him the kyber crystal that would power the red blade, and left him dead on a river moon that nobody else would ever visit. It is one of the sadder small tragedies in the whole comic run, and it comes only a handful of pages into the story of the new Vader. There is something almost cruel in the geometry of it. The exact thing that saved him, the vow to withdraw, is the exact thing that put him alone on a rock with a kyber crystal Vader needed. A shorter penance, and he dies at Order 66 with everyone else. A longer one, and he lives quietly. The vow lined him up perfectly. Jocasta Nu had been the chief librarian of the Jedi archives for longer than most Jedi in the Order had been alive. She knew where every piece of Jedi knowledge was stored, what it contained, who had access to it. She had survived Order 66, through means the comic does not detail extensively. She escaped the initial assault on the temple and spent the weeks and months afterward trying to do something that must have seemed, in the cold logic of the situation, completely impossible. She tried to continue the Jedi Order. She found a location outside Coruscant. She set up what she intended to be a covert school. She had a former assistant named Gar. She had her knowledge, which was encyclopedic and irreplaceable. She had the deep conviction that the most important thing in the galaxy, more important than fighting the Empire, was preserving the knowledge that the Empire had just tried to burn. Vader found her too. The Grand Inquisitor helped track her. There was a confrontation in the temple. She had returned to retrieve one specific database she had hidden there, a holocron containing the locations of every Force-sensitive child the Order had identified across the galaxy. She and Vader fought over it. She tried to kill herself rather than be captured and used. He stopped her, and she said to him, before he killed her, something that was both a warning and an accusation, that whatever Sidious wanted with that database, it would not be used in any way that served Vader's interests. Vader destroyed the holocron. He killed her. And the reason he destroyed the holocron, the reason he did not bring it to Sidious, is a small, almost invisible moment of something that looks, from a great distance, like Anakin Skywalker still being present inside the armor. Sit with that for a second. He tore up a list of children, in defiance of the master he had just sworn himself to, and killed the woman who reminded him he still had the ability to defy him. It is not a redemption, it is a fingerprint. Koth had removed himself from the Jedi Order before Order 66 in a different way from Infilla. He was not on a vow of penance. He had been removed from the Jedi High Council and, by the time of the events of Revenge of the Sith, had effectively departed from active Jedi life. He had gotten married. His wife was a female Zabrak named Mira. He had become a priest of the Church of the Ganthic Enlightenment. He was, in the most literal sense, not a Jedi anymore. The Empire did not care about that distinction either. Vader came for him in an issue of the Darth Vader comic published in 2018. Koth had a newborn daughter. Vader used the daughter, held her above a fatal drop, to distract Koth at the critical moment. Then he ended it. His daughter was taken by the Empire. Whatever they intended to do with a Force-sensitive infant, it was not gentle. The cruelty of that specific tactic, using a child to distract a parent, is not accidental. It is systematic. It is the same logic as Order 66 itself. Use the thing a person loves most to destroy their ability to respond. Koth had built a quiet life. He had found something worth protecting. Vader used exactly that protection as the weapon against him. Farron Bar was a Padawan who had been in deep hiding since Order 66, hiding on the ocean world of Mon Cala, the homeworld of Admiral Akbar's people. He had spent years as the trusted advisor of the Mon Cala king, building influence, gathering information, piecing together with obsessive thoroughness the full picture of what had happened to the Jedi and who was responsible. He figured out that Darth Vader was Anakin Skywalker, not from a revelation or a confession, from evidence, from documents, from tracking the trajectory of events with the careful, methodical mind of someone who had nothing to do for years but read and analyze and think. He put it together from fragments, and when he had his answer, he held it like a weapon, because he understood that information like that could only be used once, and it had to count. It counted in the way that only the most desperate gambits count. When the Empire finally came for Mon Cala in force, bringing Inquisitors alongside their military, Bar's defensive position collapsed. He was cornered with Inquisitors bearing down on him and clone purge troopers, soldiers who carried active inhibitor chips, closing in. And he looked at the Inquisitors, and he announced their names. He named them as former Jedi, loudly, in front of the purge troopers with active chips. Order 66 activated against the Inquisitors. The purge troopers turned their weapons on their own Inquisitor commanders, because the chips did not distinguish between a Jedi who was currently fighting for the Republic and a Jedi who had defected to the Empire 15 years ago. The biology of the programming did not care about politics. It said Jedi, and it fired. The scene in the comic is one of the most cleverly constructed moments in the entire Darth Vader run. Bar used the Empire's own murder mechanism against itself. He turned Order 66 backward. It did not save him. Vader came and killed him personally, but it gave his last students, including a young woman named Verla, the window they needed to escape. Verla survived. She survived Vader. She survived the Inquisitors. She survived for decades, living in deep hiding, until the events of an issue of the 2020 Star Wars comic run, where she encountered Luke Skywalker and reacted to the discovery that he was Vader's son by trying to drown him in a pool. R2-D2 intervened. She survived that too. The reaction to drown a man, to kill the son of the person who destroyed your entire world without warning, is not, actually, difficult to understand. Verla has spent decades being hunted. She has watched everyone she knew be killed. She has lived the kind of life that makes ordinary human interaction feel like a foreign language. She looked at Luke Skywalker, and she did not see hope. She saw a continuation of the thing that had tried to erase her. The fact that she was wrong about that does not mean her response was incomprehensible. She is one of the few Order 66 survivors in the entire canon who makes it to the post-Return of the Jedi era. She walked all the way through the Empire and came out on the other side still alive, still angry, still herself. The Imperial target list that appears in that same Darth Vader comic run by Charles Soule includes names that the show never depicts on screen. Survivors who remain alive somewhere in the galaxy, tracked by the Empire as high-priority threats, their fates unresolved in any current canon source. Coleman Kesage was a member of the Jedi High Council who survived Order 66. His species, his background, and the specifics of how he escaped are not detailed in the sources. He is on the list. He was enough of a concern to the Empire that they placed him among their highest priorities. What happened to him after that is unknown. Oppo Rancisis was another High Council member on the same list, a serpent-tailed Thespian, recognizable from the films by his coiled lower body and his long white hair. He was one of the more distinctive presences on the Council through the prequel era. His fate is similarly unconfirmed. Some sources imply he died before the events of Return of the Jedi, but no canon source has confirmed that directly. Selrock Eluos and Kamun Koli round out the Imperial list. There is a specific detail hidden in those two names. Selrock Eluos is Charles Soule spelled backward, Selrock being Charles reversed, Eluos being Soule reversed. Kamun Koli incorporates the name of Darth Vader artist Giuseppe Camuncoli. They are what writers call tuckerizations, a tradition of hiding a creator's or a colleague's name inside a fictional character. What makes them interesting beyond that self-referential joke is that Lucasfilm's Matt Martin formally confirmed they are real canon characters, not merely Easter eggs. Selrock Eluos is a Jedi who survived Order 66. He just happens to have a writer's name spelled backward. Their fates are unknown. Those unknown fates are themselves a kind of storytelling. The galaxy is large. The Empire was thorough but not omniscient. Some of the people on those lists found a way to disappear that was good enough. Not everyone who survived Order 66 got found. Not everyone's story ends in a confrontation with Vader or an Inquisitor's blade. Some of them just kept going. In the silence between the pages that have been written, in the space between canon entries, there are people still alive who nobody has ever gone looking for. That is one of the things this story does when you sit with it long enough. It makes the galaxy feel very large and very full of possibility, even in the darkest of its years. There is something kind about that, I think. In a franchise that loves its final confrontations, its throne room duels, its long-planned catharsis, there is room in the corners for people whose story does not need to end on camera. Somewhere in a shipyard, on a moon nobody surveyed, in a bar in a city too small to matter, someone with old calluses on their fingers is quietly still alive. The audit sheet does not close. That is the whole point. Quinlan Vos was a Jedi Master who had always been, by the Order's standards, a complicated case. He had gone deep undercover among criminal organizations during the Clone Wars. He had gotten close to the dark side in ways that most Jedi would consider disqualifying. He had a relationship and a daughter with the dark assassin Asajj Ventress, whose story ended in her death, giving up her life force to save his. He was, by every measure, a Jedi who had tested his own limits until the limits broke. He survived Order 66 by methods the canon has not fully depicted. What the canon has depicted is what he did afterward. He founded the Hidden Path. The Hidden Path was an underground network, a secret infrastructure of safe houses, volunteer guides, forged documents, and safe routes that existed for one purpose: getting Force-sensitive people away from the Empire. It was modeled, structurally, on historical resistance networks, the logic of a system that moves people through a galaxy rather than fighting for territory in one. Quinlan Vos built it and ran it for years before anyone else the show follows is even aware it exists. In the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, Obi-Wan sees Vos's name carved on a safe house wall and stops moving. The reaction on his face, the stillness, the weight of it, tells you everything. His friend is alive. The person who should have died, by the law of averages and the efficiency of the Inquisitorius, is alive and leaving his name in the walls of places that help people escape. Obi-Wan did not know. Neither did the audience, until that moment. Vos was later confirmed as the Hidden Path's founder in the animated project Star Wars, Tales of the Underworld. The full scope of what he built, how many people passed through it, how many survived because of the infrastructure he created, is not enumerated in canon. But the Hidden Path appears in multiple places across the post-Order 66 canon, and it helps people in every appearance. Whatever the count is, it is significant. Taron Malicos is a portrait of what Order 66 could do to someone without anyone to run toward. He was a Jedi Master who escaped his clone troopers and got off whatever planet he had been assigned to, but his ship was damaged in the process. He crashed on Dathomir, a planet that is, in the Star Wars canon, essentially a wound in the Force. The dark side energy there is pervasive and ancient and predatory, the residue of generations of Night Sister magic and death and power. It is not a place that is neutral. It works on you. Malicos's trauma from Order 66, combined with Dathomir's constant pressure of dark side energy, combined with complete isolation from any Jedi support structure, combined with years of no one to talk to who knew what he was going through, all of it bent him. He killed the Night Brother warrior Viscus. He took leadership of a Night Brother clan through violence and claimed it through manipulation. And then he found the Night Sister Merrin, the last survivor of the Night Sister Coven that Count Dooku had ordered exterminated, and he told her a lie. He told her the Jedi had killed her people. It was the Separatists who had done it. It was Dooku's General Grievous who had led the massacre, not the Jedi. But Malicos needed Merrin's power, and he needed her to not investigate too carefully. And so he gave her an enemy and a story, and let her grief and isolation do the rest. Cal Kestis arrived on Dathomir and found Malicos in the ruins of what the man had been. The fight that followed, Cal and Merrin together against Malicos, after Merrin discovered the truth of what had happened to her people, ended with Merrin using Night Sister magic to bury Malicos alive in the ground. He is presumably still down there, in the dark, unless a future story chooses to revisit him. What happened to Taron Malicos is not a fall in the traditional Star Wars sense of a Jedi choosing the dark side for power. It is the fall that happens when there is no structure, no community, no support, and nothing but a wounded person and a planet that knows exactly how to make the wound worse. He did not choose to become what he became. He eroded into it. Eno Cordova was a Jedi Master who was also an archaeologist and explorer, someone the Order used to investigate ancient sites and recover lost knowledge. He had an assistant droid named BD-1, and their relationship was, by every indication the Fallen Order game provides, the central relationship of his life. He programmed BD-1 not just to carry his research, but to carry it in pieces, releasing memories gradually, guided by the right person in the right moment, so that whoever followed in his footsteps would experience the knowledge the way he had experienced the journey. He survived Order 66 by being far enough from any conflict zone to be missed initially, in the unknown regions, investigating the remnants of the ancient Zepho civilization. He received visions of the Order's fall while meditating in the Bogano Vault. He hid his holocron, the one containing the locations of Force-sensitive children, there. He died at some point before Cal Kestis and BD-1 found each other. BD-1, sealed off from his own memories by Cordova's careful programming, let them come back one by one as Cal earned the knowledge. It is one of the more elegant storytelling structures in the games. A dead man's care for his student expressed through the architecture of how the information was withheld and then released. There is something moving about a man building a puzzle for a stranger he hoped would eventually come looking. Gungi was a Wookiee Jedi youngling who appeared in Clone Wars Season 5 in the Young Jedi arc, the episodes following a group of younglings who traveled to Ilum to build their first lightsabers. He was a child with the natural force sensitivity of his species and the curiosity that belongs to children everywhere. He survived Order 66, how exactly has not been shown, and turned up in The Bad Batch Season 2, in an episode titled Tribe, captured by a droid crime syndicate called the Vanguard Axis, who intended to sell him into slavery. Omega and the Bad Batch freed him. They returned him to Kashyyyk, where elders agreed to take him in as part of the community. The episode aired in 2023. It is quiet and bittersweet. The Wookiees accept Gungi, but the Empire is already on Kashyyyk, already beginning the occupation and enslavement that defines that planet's Imperial-era history. The welcome was real. The future of anyone living under that occupation was not guaranteed. Gungi is one of the smallest-scale survivors in this entire story. He is not a master, not a knight, barely a student. He is a child who ended up in the wrong place at the right time, to be found by the right people. His future, within the context of what canon has provided, remains open. It is nice, honestly, that not every story has to close. Grandia is one of the most unusual survivors in the entire canon, unusual enough that she deserves careful attention. She appears in Legacy of Vader, the recent comic series by Charles Soule, in an encounter with Kylo Ren. By the time of that meeting, she is an elderly woman. She has spent decades, the entire Imperial period and beyond, in a specific, self-designed exile. She did not hide the way most survivors hid. She did not build a new identity. She did not join a resistance network. She trained. On the night of Order 66, she survived using the Force. Specifically, she used the Jedi mind trick. She used it on the clones who came for her, making them turn on each other. She used a technique meant for isolated, brief persuasion and scaled it up to a situation that should have overwhelmed it. It worked, and she decided, in the aftermath, that this specific ability, this capacity to reach into another mind and reshape what they found there, was the thing she was going to spend the rest of her life mastering. No lightsaber, no combat training, just the mind. For decades, she became, by the time Kylo Ren found her, the greatest practitioner of the Jedi mind trick in the canon's history, able to influence even Hutts and Toydarians, species that are specifically resistant to Jedi mental influence. She had found, in the gap between what the technique was supposed to be able to do and what she needed it to do, an entire expanded possibility. When Kylo Ren attempted to read her mind, she read his instead. She told him she could hear who he truly was, because he was screaming it to himself. Grandia's survival is the most unique in the entire canon. Pure force persuasion, no weapons, an entire life built around a single technique taken to its absolute limit. She survived Order 66, the only way she had available, and then she spent the next several decades becoming the best in the galaxy at the thing that had saved her. That, on its own, is an argument for a very different kind of Jedi than the one the movies usually give us. Tensu Run was a Jedi Knight who did not hide, did not defect, did not go dark, and did not stop fighting. He appears in the Star Wars Inquisitors comic miniseries from 2024, written by Rodney Barnes with art by Ramon Rosanas, and his story is the story of active, ongoing resistance at a point in the Imperial period when active resistance was an excellent way to get yourself killed quickly. He bombed Imperial outposts, he freed prisoners, he confronted Inquisitors. He was helped in this by Ellen Rast, his former master, who also survived Order 66, and who convinced Tensu that rebuilding the Jedi Order was worth attempting even in the darkest circumstances. The Grand Inquisitor was assigned specifically to hunt him. The hunt is the spine of the comic's plot. Tensu Run is not a famous character. He does not carry the cultural weight of Ahsoka or Kanan, but his story represents something specific and important in the larger picture. Not every survivor retreated. Some of them kept fighting. Some of them decided that the correct response to the destruction of the Order was not hiding or exile or identity erasure, but continued, active, stubborn resistance. Tensu Run chose to remain visible, at enormous personal risk, because he believed that the work was still worth doing. His story is still being told. Where it ends is unknown. I hope it does not end well, honestly. because active resistance in that empire almost never does, and a clean ending would feel like the story flinching. But if it does end well, I will happily be wrong. Either way, he is already unusual, because the standard Order 66 survivor script is to disappear, and he refused to. Iskat-Akaris was identified by Palpatine himself before Order 66 as someone who might be useful on the other side of it. That is the detail that makes her story different from almost everyone else in this list. She did not survive by luck, or by running, or by being far from the fighting. She was deliberately spared. Palpatine had observed, through whatever surveillance the Sith maintained over the Jedi Order, that Iskat had deep resentments toward the Order, toward its restrictions, toward whatever limits she felt had been placed on her. He saw the fissure in her, and he calculated, correctly, that it could be widened. When Order 66 was activated on the planet Frong, where Iskat and her fellow Jedi Tual and Yaluna were on a mission, a clone officer named Captain Spider presented her with a holographic message from Sidious rather than a death warrant. The message asked, essentially, do you still question the Jedi? Do you still want to be free of their rules? She said yes. The clones who had been aiming at her turned away. The clones who had been aiming at Tualan did not. She walked away. Tualan lay bleeding in the dirt. The rest of Iskat's story is covered in the novel Inquisitor, Rise of the Red Blade by Delilah S. Dawson, published in the summer of 2023. It is the most detailed interior portrait of what it meant to become an Inquisitor. The training, the culture, the cruelty that the system deliberately cultivated, the ways in which the Inquisitorius was designed to make its members dependent on the structure that had recruited them. Iskat and Tualan, who survived his wounds through rage and desperation, and eventually found his own way into the Inquisitorius, formed a forbidden relationship within that structure, which added another layer of vulnerability to an already precarious existence. The Inquisitorius was not a haven. It was a cage with better food than the alternative. The Inquisitors were watched, tested, punished for weakness, expendable to Vader at any moment. They were survivors who traded one kind of captivity for another, who had gained protection from the thing that had almost killed them by becoming part of it. There are at least 16 named Inquisitors in the Star Wars canon as of the middle of the last decade. Virtually all of them were former Jedi or Force sensitives who survived Order 66, whether through design, desperation, or destruction. The Inquisitorius is, in a dark and specific sense, the largest single gathering of Order 66 survivors in the known canon, gathered in one place, pointed at the others. Sit with what that actually means. The Empire did not just try to kill the Jedi. It tried to turn the surviving Jedi into weapons against each other. It tried to make the Order's own people the instrument of its final erasure. Some of them resisted that design. Eventually, Reva threw her lightsaber away. Trilla said, "Avenge us," with her last breath. But the design itself, the architecture of recruitment and breaking and redirection, was one of the most sophisticated acts of institutional destruction in galactic history. And when you look at the Order 66 story as a whole, that mechanism is the part that keeps coming back around. There is something the Star Wars franchise has done over the 20 years and more since Revenge of the Sith that deserves its own examination. Something that is easy to miss when you are watching each individual entry and absorbing each individual story, but that becomes visible when you step back and look at the full shape of what has been built. The original film trilogy, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, presents a galaxy in which the Jedi are essentially gone. Obi-Wan is a hermit. Yoda is a hermit. Luke is a farmer's nephew who has never heard the word Jedi until he is 19 years old. The Order is an ancient legend, something so thoroughly erased that when Obi-Wan tells Luke about the Force in a desert hut on Tatooine, he is telling him about something he has never encountered or had any frame of reference for. The galaxy of the original trilogy is a galaxy after a successful extinction. It is a galaxy that has moved on and forgotten. What the expanded canon has done, across 2 decades of comics and novels and animated series and games, is fill in the exact mechanism of how that forgetting happened. And the picture that emerges is considerably more complicated than extinction. The Jedi were not just killed. They were hunted, systematically, for years. Some of them survived the initial night. Some of them survived for a decade or more. Some of them, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and perhaps others, survived all the way to the events of the original trilogy. The galaxy did not forget because there was no one left to remember. The galaxy forgot because the Empire made forgetting a matter of survival, and survival eventually became habit. Sit with what that actually means for the story of those 3 films. Obi-Wan Kenobi, sitting in a hut on Tatooine, knows the complete truth of what happened. He watched it happen. He was present for the fall of the Republic, the betrayal of his closest friend, the murder of 10,000 colleagues. He spent years trying not to fall apart under the weight of that knowledge. And when Luke arrives and asks about the Force, about the Jedi, about what the world was like before, Obi-Wan tells him a version, a curated version, a version that is true in its broad outlines, but that omits everything Obi-Wan himself is still carrying. He does not tell Luke about Order 66. He does not tell Luke about Fives, or the inhibitor chips, or how close the whole thing came to being exposed. He tells Luke about the Force, and about Vader, and he gives him what he needs to take the next step. That is not dishonesty. That is someone managing the only thing he can still manage, which is how much of the truth is useful to share at any given moment. The emotional reality of surviving Order 66, the interior weight of it, is something the expanded canon has been gradually, carefully willing to look at directly. The Clone Wars final arc, Siege of Mandalore, does not shy away from the fact that Ahsoka and Rex emerge from their survival having lost everyone they knew who wore armor. The Bad Batch opens with a group of soldiers trying to understand why they did not feel the thing their brothers felt, why they held the line on collar in a way that violated everything the Order commanded. Kanan Jarrus spends multiple seasons of Rebels flinching away from everything that would require him to be fully present as a Jedi, not because he is cowardly, but because presence is exposure, and exposure gets you killed. These are not peripheral details. They are the show telling you something about what it means to be a person who has to keep living after the worst night of their life. The psychological dimension of the Order 66 survival stories is, when you examine it carefully, the thing that separates them from standard action-adventure narrative. These are not stories about warriors who overcome adversity and emerge stronger. They are stories about people who were trained for a world that no longer exists, who have skills and knowledge and abilities designed for a function that has been made illegal, who have to find something, anything, to do with who they are now that everything they were supposed to become has been burned away. Kanan Jarrus becomes a teacher because that is the only use he can find for what Depa Billaba gave him. Not because he is ready to teach. He is not ready. He knows he is not ready. He knows he never finished his own training. He takes Ezra on because Ezra is in front of him, and the alternative is to walk away from a Force-sensitive 14-year-old in the same position he was in when he was 14, and he cannot do that. The teaching is not a triumph. It is a necessary improvisation by someone who has nothing else. Sarah Junda cuts herself off from the Force because the Force is the thing she used when she broke. It is the connection she had to herself, and to her abilities, and to her identity as a Jedi, and that connection is the thing that failed Trilla. Cutting it off is self-punishment, yes, but it is also, in its own disordered way, a form of protection, for herself and for anyone who might depend on her. She does not trust herself with it. The years of disconnection are not paralysis. They are the consequences of a specific act that she has not been able to forgive herself for, lived out in real time. Cal Kestis suppresses his Force abilities for 5 years, and then spends an entire game gradually learning to use them again. Not quickly, not all at once, but slowly recovering connection through experience and trust, and the specific company of people who do not require him to be fully functional before they accept him. BD-1 is patient. Ser is complicated but present. The ship is home in a way that Braca never was. Cal's Force powers returning across the game's progression is not a power fantasy. It is a portrait of recovery, with the mechanics of an action game mapped onto it. These stories know what they are doing. They are not using Order 66 as backstory filler. They are using it as the wound that everything after it either tends or ignores. And the quality of the tending or the ignoring is the whole character. The Inquisitors, examined as an institution rather than as individual villains, reveals the Empire's most sophisticated tactic. The inhibitor chips were the weapon of Order 66, the blunt instrument, the gun pointed at the Jedi through their own clones. The Inquisitors was the follow-up mechanism. It was the recognition that the chips would not catch everyone, that some Jedi would survive, and that surviving Jedi, under the right conditions of pressure and isolation and pain, could be turned. The recruitment methodology appears, in various forms, across multiple canon sources. Physical and psychological torture, yes, but more specifically, the offer of structure, of purpose, of a place in the world. The galaxy has just been reorganized from top to bottom. Everything that the surviving Jedi knew, every institution, every ally, every safe place, has been erased. The Empire offers something to fill that void: identity, a number, a title, a hierarchy that tells you exactly where you stand and what you are supposed to do. For someone who has been running and hiding and trying to survive without any structure at all, that offer is not as easy to refuse as it looks from the outside. That is what Iskatacaris accepted. That is what Trilla Suduri was broken into accepting. That is what the Grand Inquisitor chose, before the breaking was even necessary. Each path into the Inquisitorius is slightly different, but the endpoint is the same. A Jedi who survived Order 66 is now a weapon aimed at the others who survived it. The circularity of it is one of the Empire's genuine strategic masterpieces. You cannot fight a resistance if its members are killing each other. You cannot preserve a tradition if the tradition's own survivors are hunting it down. The fact that this did not fully work, that Reva threw her lightsaber away, that Trilla found her last words, that even the Grand Inquisitor eventually chose death over submission to Vader, is not evidence that the Inquisitorius was a failure. It is evidence that people are harder to fully erase than systems account for. The fissures in the Inquisitorius are the same fissures that the Force exploits everywhere. The places where what a person was cannot be completely buried under what they have been turned into. Those fissures are small. In most cases, they only open at the end, if they open at all. But they are there. Obi-Wan Kenobi's 9 years on Tatooine before the events of the Kenobi show deserve more examination than the show itself is always able to give them, simply because the show focuses on the events that break his exile rather than the texture of the exile itself. The exile is the foundation that makes the show's events meaningful. Without understanding what almost a decade of not being a Jedi does to someone who was one of the best, the reawakening has less weight. He lived in a cave in the Jundland Wastes. He bought food in Anchorhead. He worked at a meat processing facility. There is a specific detail in the show's early episodes about his daily work, the contrast between what his hands were built to do and what they were actually doing. He watched Owen and Beru's homestead from a distance. He tried to give Luke a toy, and Owen turned it away, because Owen did not want Luke to know Obi-Wan existed, did not want the orbit of a Jedi anywhere near the boy he was trying to raise as normal. The refusal lands on Obi-Wan like a verdict. He is the man who destroyed Anakin Skywalker. Not killed, because Vader is alive, but destroyed the person Anakin was supposed to be. He is the man who trained the father without seeing what was building in him until it was too late. Owen Lars knows this. He does not say it directly, but it is there in every conversation they have, in the way Owen moves his body to stand between Obi-Wan and any proximity to Luke. Owen's protectiveness is not irrational. Obi-Wan's track record with Skywalkers is not good. The Kenobi show does something specific with the question of whether Obi-Wan can still fight. In the first 2 episodes, he cannot. He is slow and afraid and disconnected from the Force in a way that looks, from the outside, like permanent damage. In the 3rd episode, when he is cornered and Leia is taken and there is nothing else to do, something wakes up. Not fully. He is not the duelist he was, but he is not empty either. There is something there, still, underneath the years. The confrontation with Vader in that 3rd episode, Vader dragging Obi-Wan through fire, holding him above the flames, is filmed and scored in a way that makes it feel less like an action sequence and more like a nightmare. Obi-Wan does not fight back. He cannot. He is not ready. He barely survives because someone else intervenes. And the horror on his face as he recognizes what Anakin has become, fully, in person, for the first time since Mustafar, is the face of someone having the worst thing they have ever done confirmed for them in real time. The final duel in the 6th episode is the corrective. He fights Vader on equal terms, better than equal terms, by the end, and the moment where he splits Vader's faceplate and sees the ruined man inside is one of the franchise's most careful scenes. He could kill him. He has him beaten. He says what he needs to say. that he is not the one who was wrong, that Anakin was, and yet that he will never stop caring about who Anakin used to be. Then he walks away. He lets Vader live. He goes back to the desert. He reconnects with Qui-Gon Jinn's voice for the first time in years, properly, fully, and the sequence ends with him hearing and then seeing his old master for the first time since before Mustafar. That reunion, the thing the show earns in its final minutes, is the actual resolution of Obi-Wan Kenobi's survival arc. Not defeating Vader, not rescuing Leia. The reconnection with the person who first taught him what it meant to be a Jedi, whom he had been trying to reach for 9 years, who appears now in the light of the desert because Obi-Wan has finally found his way back to himself. The detail that Qui-Gon Jinn appears in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show as his full ghost self, not just a voice or balls of light, but a visible manifestation, is specifically the payoff of everything established in Clone Wars Season 6. Qui-Gon spent his years after death learning to manifest more completely. Obi-Wan, during his exile, had been unable to reach him because Obi-Wan had closed himself off. When Obi-Wan opens again, Qui-Gon can appear again. The Force ghost mechanics and the emotional arc are the same thing, expressed in the same image. That is not a small thing either. The story of the clones who were part of Order 66 deserves a moment here, because it is easy to focus entirely on the Jedi and lose sight of what happened to the other side of those relationships. Rex tore out his own chip and spent the rest of the Clone Wars era haunted by what he almost did. He appeared in Rebels Season 3, living in an old walker on the deserted planet Selos with 2 other veterans, Commander Wolffe and Captain Gregor, old men waiting out the Empire. He joined the rebellion. He fought at the Battle of Endor. He survived the whole thing. Commander Cody, who shot Obi-Wan off the cliff at Utapau, did not have his chip removed for years. He served the Empire for a long time. There is a canon source that suggests he eventually went absent from Imperial service, that even Cody found some line he could not cross. But the version of Cody who exists in the moment of Order 66 is the version without a choice, and the tragedy of that specific version is the tragedy of every clone who received the Order. These were people who had years of loyalty and partnership with their Jedi commanders, people who in many cases clearly cared about those commanders, and a biological mechanism overrode all of it in seconds. They did not betray the Jedi. They were used to betray them. There is a difference, and the stories of Rex and Cody and the Bad Batch exist, in part, to insist on that difference. The Bad Batch themselves, clone soldiers whose mutations gave them partial resistance to their inhibitor chips, spent their entire series dealing with the fallout of Kaller, with the knowledge that they had been present when a Jedi died and a child ran, with Crosshair, their most chip-susceptible member, being fully turned by the Empire while the others fled. The Bad Batch series, which ran across 3 seasons from 2021 through 2024, is partly a story about what happens to soldiers designed for a specific war when that war ends. But it is also, consistently, a story about the weight of what happened on Kaller. They could not save Depa Billaba. They did not try to kill Caleb. They made the only choices they could make in the seconds they had, and then they lived with the aftermath. Clone Force 99's survival through the Bad Batch series is a different kind of survival than the Jedi stories. They are not Force-sensitive. They were not hunted by the Inquisitors. They had a ship and skills and resources that most survivors lacked. But their story is woven into the Order 66 survivor narratives in ways that keep paying off. Omega finding Gungi, Hunter's choice on Kaller echoing through every subsequent episode that tests whether the Bad Batch will protect the innocent at cost to themselves. The Bad Batch season finale, the end of the entire series, connects directly back to the events of that first episode. Back to Kaller, back to the exact moment where the war ended and the world changed, and a boy ran and a woman stopped fighting. There is a version of the Order 66 story that the official canon does not tell in full. The version experienced by the galaxy's civilian population. The people who lived through the Clone Wars under Republic governance and then woke up one day to the announcement that the Jedi had been declared enemies of the state, that they had tried to assassinate the Chancellor, that the clone army had discovered their treason and stopped it. The propaganda was immediate and comprehensive. Palpatine's speech in the Senate had laid the groundwork. By the time the full details emerged, and they were carefully controlled, the narrative was already set. The Jedi who survived Order 66 were not just hunted by the Inquisitors. They were hunted by the general population, who had been told the Jedi were traitors. Nari, hiding on Tatooine 9 years before the Battle of Yavin, was not just hiding from Inquisitors. He was hiding from a planet full of people who had been told, for a decade, that the Jedi had tried to overthrow the Republic. Reva found him because someone turned him in. Not because the Inquisitorius' intelligence network was perfect, but because Tatooine had eyes, and some of those eyes had been taught to look for Jedi. The public execution Reva staged, crucifying Nari in the streets of Mos Eisley, was not just a message to Obi-Wan. It was a demonstration of Imperial power in a place where Imperial presence was relatively thin. It was a reminder, to every person who witnessed it, of what the state thought of Force users. It was institutional violence designed to be seen. Nari's story in the canon is brief and brutal, and almost entirely without interiority. He appears in the first episode of the Kenobi show, clearly frightened, clearly unable to fully suppress his identity, trying desperately to live an ordinary life and failing. He asks Obi-Wan for help, and Obi-Wan turns him away. He is dead before the end of the episode. The show uses him primarily as the mechanism that forces Obi-Wan out of his paralysis. His death is the event that makes it impossible for Obi-Wan to pretend the world is manageable. But that utilitarian narrative function does not exhaust what Nari represents. He represents every surviving Jedi who did not have a Master Yoda connection, or a Seer Junda with a ship, or a Rex with chip surgery knowledge. Every surviving Jedi who was just a person, trying to hide, not quite managing it. The Star Wars canon has been mostly interested in the survivors with extraordinary resources or extraordinary stories. Nari is a reminder that most of the survivors were ordinary, that most of them probably ended the way he did, that the roughly 30 named survivors in canon represent the top of a very dark iceberg. The Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston, set roughly a year after Order 66, is the most granular look at what the period immediately after was like for someone surviving it without resources. Ahsoka on Rada is not a spy or a soldier or a force-using hero in that story. She is an agricultural worker. She keeps her head down. She helps with the harvest. She has a community of regular people around her, people who do not know what she is, who know her as Ashla, a girl with unusual reflexes and a quiet manner who is good at her job. She has built something small but functional, and she knows that it is fragile, and she is right. The novel's depiction of the Empire arriving on Rada, requisitioning the farmland, forcing the population to grow a different crop that depletes the soil, breaking the agricultural economy that had supported a community for generations, is a portrait of Imperial occupation at ground level. It is the kind of detail that most Star Wars stories do not slow down for. Not stormtroopers, not TIE fighters, just the paperwork of an empire ruining a valley. That texture is what makes the Rada arc feel so heavy, and it is what makes the eventual moment where Ahsoka picks up a weapon again feel earned rather than triumphant. Ahsoka watches it happen and tries to stay uninvolved, because involvement means visibility, and visibility means death. She helps where she can without being seen to help. She stretches the boundaries of her cover until the cover breaks, and when it breaks, she fights with everything she has. But what the book emphasizes is how long she stayed invisible, how hard she worked to maintain that invisibility, how much she had to swallow to do it. The white lightsabers that emerge from that fight are the physical expression of her entire journey from Order 66 to that moment. Red crystals, forcibly bled by a Sith process, taken from the person who came to kill her, purified through her specific relationship with the Force. They are not Jedi sabers. They are not Sith sabers. They are Ahsoka's sabers, made from pieces of the system that tried to destroy her, transformed by her into something that belongs entirely to who she is. That is a reframe worth sitting with. The world between worlds scene in Rebels Season 4, where Ezra pulls Ahsoka out of her duel with Vader at the Sith Temple on Malachor, is the other pillar of her survival story. She was losing that duel. She was going to die on Malachor, in the ruins of a Sith temple, fighting the man who had trained her before he was the man who was trying to kill her. Ezra reached back through time and pulled her out. The mechanism of the world between worlds is explicitly a plot device that the show uses exactly once, for exactly this purpose, and then seals away behind a door that Palpatine cannot reopen. It was not a general resurrection. It was a specific rescue, done once, because the story needed Ahsoka to survive, and the show was honest enough to admit that she was not going to survive that duel on her own. She walked out of the world between worlds, onto a desert world, and vanished from the timeline for years. By the time Rebels ended, she was a white-robed figure walking into an unknown landscape, and the audience was left with 30 seconds of that image and no further information. The Ahsoka show, years later, picks her story up far down the road, post-Return of the Jedi, post-everything, and treats her as someone who has been doing a great deal in the intervening years that the audience simply has not been shown. She is not diminished by the gap. She is deepened by it. The question the Ahsoka show asks, underneath all of its plot machinery about Thrawn and the distant galaxy, and Sabine's training, and what it means to be a Jedi after the fall of the Empire, the underlying question is this: what does this person owe? She has survived everything. She has paid every price. She has already given more than anyone could reasonably ask. What does she owe now, to people who are asking her for more? The answer the show suggests is not a clean one. She owes what she can give, when it is the right thing, not because obligation compels her, but because she chooses it. The white sabers at her side are still the symbol of someone who chose her own path through every pressure that tried to redirect her. She is still choosing. That is the story. The full count of Order 66 survivors across all of canon is, by reliable estimates, somewhere between fewer than 100 people and around 200 people out of an order of 10,000. The named survivors in this video number somewhere around 30. Roughly 3 dozen known, named individuals who represent the entire inheritance of 1,000 generations of Jedi tradition. Every technique, every meditation, every piece of philosophy and combat knowledge and Force understanding that the Order had accumulated across millennia, carried forward in about 30 people. Each of them carried it differently. Yoda carried it in silence on a swamp planet, learning to persist beyond death. Obi-Wan carried it in the stillness of a desert cave, watching over a boy who did not know what he carried. Ahsoka carried it in white lightsabers that belonged to no tradition, in a life that belonged to no institution. Kanan carried it in the act of teaching, despite his own incomplete understanding. Kestis carried it in the choice to protect the children, even at the cost of the answer he had been searching for. Kelleran carried it at a dead run through a burning building with an infant in his arms. Some of them lost it to the dark. Malicos eroded under Dathomir's weight. Trilla broke under torture. The Grand Inquisitor made his choice before anyone asked him. Iskat Akaris traded hers for the appearance of freedom. Those losses are not failures of the Force or failures of the Jedi. They are what happens to people when the world they were shaped by is destroyed without warning, and there is no one left to help them find their footing. There is a recurring structural feature in every Order 66 survivor story that is worth naming plainly, because it explains something about why these stories keep resonating in the way they do. Every single survivor story is, at its core, a story about what you do after the worst moment of your life, when you cannot go back and you cannot stop. The Jedi Order was not just a job. It was not just a profession. For most of the people in it, it was the only world they had ever known. Jedi younglings were identified as Force-sensitive as infants and brought to the temple for training before they were old enough to have formed any other identity. They did not have families in the conventional sense. They did not grow up in houses or neighborhoods or communities outside the temple. The Order was their entire world, their family, their culture, their social structure, their purpose, their identity. The master and Padawan relationship was the closest thing to a parent and child bond most of them had ever experienced. When Order 66 destroyed the Order, it did not just kill an institution. It destroyed the only world those survivors had, and then it left them alive in a world they did not know, where everything they had been trained to be was illegal, where the relationships that structured their lives were gone, where the very abilities they had spent their entire lives developing were a death sentence if anyone noticed them. That is the specific texture of what the survivors are carrying. Not just trauma, not just grief. The complete dissolution of every context that made them who they were. They did not lose their home. They lost the entire reality in which home had been possible. And yet they kept finding ways to build something. Yoda built a new understanding of what death and the Force could mean, and passed it forward. Obi-Wan built a vigilance and a patience that lasted a decade, and then rebuilt himself in the years after that. Ahsoka built an identity with no institutional frame at all. Just her, just the Force, just the people she chose to care about. Kanan built a family on a ship full of people who needed a Jedi even if they could not say so. Cal built the habit of not giving up even when the answer turned out to be nothing. None of them built what they had before. None of them could. The order of 1,000 generations was gone, and no individual survivor could reconstruct it. And the ones who tried to reconstruct it in miniature, Jocasta Nu with her hidden school, Tensu Run with his active resistance, Eno Cordova with his hidden holocron, were working against impossible odds. The point is not that they succeeded. The point is that they tried. That the default response to total loss, across almost every one of these stories, was not surrender. It was a kind of stubbornness that looks, from the outside, like hope, even when it does not feel like it from the inside. Ezra Bridger was born on the same day Order 66 was executed. This is a canonical detail in the Star Wars Rebels lore, and Dave Filoni and the Rebels writing team included it intentionally as a thematic counterpoint. On the day the Jedi Order died, a child was born who would grow up to be trained by one of its last representatives. On the day the old world ended, the person who would inherit its light drew his first breath. He did not survive Order 66. He was a newborn, not a Jedi, not even a Force-sensitive whose abilities were known. But his existence, timed to that exact moment, is the show's declaration about what the survivor stories ultimately mean. They are not stories about what was lost. They are stories about what kept going. The most honest thing you can say about the Jedi who survived Order 66 is that their survival was not a function of virtue. It was a function of circumstance. Yoda sensed the change because he had 9 centuries of Force attunement. Obi-Wan survived because a cliff happened to be near water. Ahsoka survived because Rex had heard fives before he died. Kanan survived because Hunter chose not to shoot a child and Crosshair missed. Grogu survived because there was one Jedi Master in the temple fast enough to reach him in time. The galaxy tried very hard to end the Jedi Order in a single night. It nearly succeeded. What remained was not the result of design or destiny. It was the result of small, specific accidents. A warning that landed. A fall that did not kill. A Jedi Master still fast enough. A door still open that should have been closed. What those survivors did with their survival is a different question entirely. And the answer to that question, spread across every piece of media covered in this video, in every format Star Wars has used across 2 full decades and more, is everything. They did everything that could be done from that starting point. They hid, and they fought, and they trained, and they built networks, and they carried infants through burning buildings, and they made weapons of the Empire's own mechanisms, and they found their way back from the dark, and they refused to become the thing the darkness wanted them to become. The Jedi Order that Luke Skywalker encountered, in that old man in the desert and that ancient teacher in the swamp, was not the order of 1,000 generations. It was smaller. It was quieter. It had been compressed by violence into something much more essential. But it was not gone. The Force was not gone. The possibility of what the Jedi had always represented, of people choosing to use power in service of others, of presence rather than dominance, of wisdom rather than control, that was not gone either. Roughly 36 people carried it through the dark, each in their own way, each for as long as they could. That is not a tragedy. That is the whole story. If you have made it this far, or if you dozed off somewhere around Yoda's swamp and are hearing this in the background as your last thought before sleep, the same thing is true either way. The Jedi did not go quietly. The Order died in a night, and the people who survived that night spent the rest of their lives